Most of you have probably seen the short that has gone absolutely viral. The woman in the short can be seen taking revenge on the person who defiled and ended the life of her daughter in court. And today we are taking a look at the story behind it. But ask yourself, how do you really feel about vigilante justice? Do you believe that the justice system often falls short and it can't be trusted? Or do you feel comfortable leaving it in their hands? But before we continue, hello everyone, welcome to Crime Rush. I'm Inga, and on this channel we discuss all true crime stories. So if that's your thing, take a quick moment and subscribe and like this video to show your support. However, if you are easily triggered or sensitive to this type of content, please turn away and take care of your mental health first. And now that we have that out of the way, let's jump into the case of Marianne Bachmeier. Marianne Bachmeier was born on the 3rd of June in 1950 in Saddest, Saxony in Germany. Her parents were religious and she was raised in a strict and conservative household. But it seems to me that was almost just a front because Marianne's home life was awful. Her father was a former member of the Waffen-SS, which was a combat branch of the Nazis. And if that wasn't bad enough, he was also an alcoholic who would spend most of his time at a bar close to their home. He was cold, he was violent, and he didn't treat his wife and daughter very well, and he didn't provide them with a good home life. And to no one's surprise, Marianne's parents got a divorce when her father just one day walked out on them. But Marianne's mother would soon remarry, and sadly, this would just be another dark chapter in Marianne's life. Her new stepfather didn't really like her at all. She was just a troubled child in his eyes, and he laid down so many rules, which were very difficult for Marianne to follow. And much like her own father, he was cold, he was strict, he was conservative and religious. Marianne always felt like she couldn't measure up or live up to his expectations. And there's not much to go on, but I sort of got the feeling from my research that Marianne could be a bit of a rebel. But that being said, I also picked up that her stepfather could be extremely unreasonable. He would discipline her by humiliating her and beating her. And her mother would side with him. She wouldn't take Marianne's side. In fact, her mother was extremely cold towards her and would often kick her out of the house, where she would just have to fend for herself until she was allowed to come back home. Her mom felt like she was just a burden because she was a burden on her marriage and she just created all of this drama in the household. And eventually, things would get so bad at home that Marianne's mom would kick her out for good when she was only 16 years old. Soon after this, Marianne fell pregnant with her first child, but she decided to give the baby up for adoption at birth. And only 2 years later, when she was 18 years old, she fell pregnant with her second child by her high school boyfriend. Sadly though, when she was close to the end of her pregnancy, an unknown man took advantage of her safety. Marianne did decide to give this baby up for adoption too at birth because she knew she just wasn't in a position to care for a baby or to provide for a child. But in 1972, when she was only 22 years old, things started to change in Marianne's life. She got a job as a waitress at a pub called Tipasa, and she soon fell in love with the manager of the pub, whose name was Christian Berthold, and the two started dating. That same year, Marianne fell pregnant with her third child, but this time, she decided to keep the baby. Things were different this time around. She had a stable income, she had a place to live, and she had a steady boyfriend. But sadly, Christian wasn't the best boyfriend. He cheated on Marianne constantly, and there are rumors that he once took advantage of her sexually too. But he did promise that he would stand by her and help her raise this baby. But when Marianne reached her last trimester, he changed his mind. He decided he wasn't ready to commit. What a douchebag. On the 14th of November in 1972, Marianne gave birth to a beautiful little girl, and she named her Anna Bachmeier. Marianne was thrilled with the birth of Anna, but she decided right there that she didn't want any more kids after Anna, and she asked the hospital to sterilize her right then and there. Which to me is a bit weird because you just had a baby, Marianne, maybe take some time to heal. But nevertheless, that's what she did. But Marianne was also a proud mom. She loved her baby. She loved little Anna, and she doted on her, and she was so proud of her, and she just loved being a mom to her. And baby Anna was a happy little girl. At this time, Marianne was also still working at Tipasa, the pub, and so was Christian, Anna's father. And after everything that went down between the two of them, I can only imagine that the vibe wasn't great in there. But then this weird random thing happened, and Christian arranged for Marianne to marry the chef at Tipasa. And from my research, what I could gather was that this happened so that the chef would not be deported. But Marianne would also soon find out that being a single mother was not an easy job. She was still working late hours at the pub, and Anna had to go with her every single night. And Anna knew that Christian was her father, but they didn't really have a relationship. I'm not sure how that happened, if he saw her every single day, but I don't know. It's all strange. But Anna was in there every day. Everyone knew her. She basically grew up in that pub. And sadly, it has also been said that Marianne didn't exactly rush home after her shift. No, she would stay at the pub and actually have a few drinks while Anna was sleeping on her arms at the bar or just waiting around for her mom to finish up. And little Anna was so used to also roaming the streets while her mom worked at this bar. Even at nighttime, she was known to walk in the streets and to visit people. And during the day, Marianne would mostly sleep because she would have to work late hours in the evenings, so little Anna was just left to her own devices during the day. She had no attention from her mother whatsoever, and she basically did everything on her own. By the time that Anna turned 7, Marianne started having strong feelings of guilt. She knew that this was no way for a child to be brought up, and she started considering giving Anna up for adoption or even asking a close friend of hers to raise her. But she eventually decided against this and felt that she really didn't want to lose Anna. She didn't want to give up her little girl. But unfortunately, these strong feelings of guilt from Marianne didn't change anything in their life. In fact, she would now start to spend even her free time at the bar, partying while Anna slept there or just waited for her mom. Little Anna was known as a cheerful and vibrant little girl, but she had no rules and she could basically just do whatever she wanted, and she got no attention at home. And I think we all can agree that children need structure and they need stability. It's extremely important for their well-being. Marianne would treat Anna like an adult. She would expect her to take responsibility for everything in her own little life at such a young age. And like I said, Anna would roam the streets. She would be playing with neighbors' kids, and she would often go over and visit their neighbors. Now, to me, thinking my child goes to visit a neighbor, it's a strange thought. I would never allow it, not if I'm not there with him. But we have to remember that life looked a lot different back then. Kids had a lot more freedom. I think with social media and everything we have now and true crime, we are aware as parents of all the evil that is out there, and we are not willing to take any risks with our children, which is a good thing, obviously. But Back then, it was normal for kids to play in the streets without supervision and to go to neighbors' houses and things like that. Now, it's a scary thought. I won't allow it. But on the 5th of May in 1980, Marianne had to get up and she had to get ready for an interview that she actually had with the local newspaper. It was something to do with her car. Apparently, her car had some unique look to it, and the newspaper wanted to do an interview with her and a photo shoot. But the night before, Anna and Marianne had a massive fight, and they went to bed angry with each other. And at this time, Anna was 7, and she had to be at school. But she was still so angry with her mom that she decided to spite her and to skip school that day without saying anything to her. So that day, Marianne got up. She thought Anna had gone to school. She got ready for an interview. She went and did it. She did a photo shoot and she returned home. And when she got home, Anna was supposed to be back from school already, but there was no sign of her. She immediately took to the streets and asked everyone, all her neighbors, everyone who knew Anna, but nobody had seen her. Nobody knew where Anna was. And as soon as it started getting dark, Marianne was beyond panicked. That's when she decided to phone the police and report Anna as missing. And Marianne was trying to comfort herself by saying Anna is probably still angry with her and she is probably cooling down at a friend's house or hiding out somewhere until she feels it's okay to come home. But when police interviewed all the neighbors and all of Anna's friends and there was still no sign of her, Marianne knew that something was very wrong. And this just gives me the chills because I think that is probably one of the worst things that can happen to a parent, to not know where your child is. I mean, can you imagine? You don't know where your child is. You don't know if they're hungry, if they are in pain, if someone's doing something to them. It's enough to drive a person insane. But it would not be long, and a woman who was visibly upset ran into the police station and claimed that her fiancé had made a very disturbing confession to her. She claimed her fiancé told her that he had taken the life of a little girl. Her fiancé's name was Klaus Grabowski, and he said the little girl came into his home to play with his cat, and that her name was Anna. Klaus lived right next door to Marianne and Anna, and he knew them really well. In fact, Anna used to go over to his house to play with his cat all the time. And the day before, when he bumped into Anna, he invited her over to his home to play with his cat. And I mean, there was no reason for Anna to be alarmed by this because she had done this so many times before. Why would this time be different? But this time would be different because Klaus's fiancé was not at home this day. There's not a lot of information on what exactly took place in his home, but we do know that Klaus kept Anna in there for hours, and he then proceeded to take her life by wrapping his fiancé's pantyhose around Anna's neck. It has not been confirmed if he did anything to her like that. I think you know what I mean. But I really think he did, and I'll tell you why in a bit. But after he ended her life, his fiancé soon came home, and that's when he confessed everything to her, and she immediately went to the police to report him. Now, while his fiancé was reporting him to the police, he went and he took Anna's body and placed it in some sort of box. He then took this box and placed it on his bicycle, and he rode to a canal. That is where he buried Anna's little body in a shallow grave. He then just took off, but he left a note behind for his fiancée to tell her to meet him at a certain place later that evening. I mean, what a dumbass. Obviously, she didn't go to meet him, but the police went instead. And as soon as Klaus arrived, they arrested him. Klaus very quickly admitted to the crime, but his reasoning behind it all was just very absurd to me. He said that he did it because Anna blackmailed him. Yes, he said the 7-year-old tried to seduce him And then she threatened him and said that if he didn't give her money, that she would tell everyone that he took advantage of her. And if you believe that, then you are a moron. I mean, sometimes when I hear the lies coming from these criminals, I always think like, couldn't you have thought of a better lie? I mean, it's pathetic. Klaus then took police to where he buried Anna, and that's where they found her in that shallow grave in the box. But they found her hog-tied. And they also noticed that the knots weren't exactly simplistic and they were not done in a rush. So he took his time with her. Now police had to go and break this news to Marianne. But Marianne's reaction was quite shocking, possibly because she didn't really have a reaction. In fact, Marianne didn't want to speak to cops any further. She didn't want to go and identify Anna's body. She didn't want to hear details. She just wanted nothing to do with it. It's like she just switched off. And listen, I know we sometimes look at people's reactions when we are trying to determine guilt or how much they felt for the person. But I really do believe that people grieve differently. And I think sometimes when you hear something so shocking, you have an idea of how you would react, but when it happens, you don't exactly react that way. I hope I'm making sense, because I've experienced that. I've thought before, oh, if this ever happened to me, I would go crazy and I would scream and I would cry. And when it happened, I actually did the opposite. So I guess we really just cannot judge. But I do know that sometimes we look at people and we say, oh, like, for example, Chris Watts. You could just look at that interview and see that, okay, this guy looks a bit dodgy and suspicious, right? But in this case, I think Marianne was just extremely shocked and she just had no idea how to react to this horrible news. As the days went on after Anna's death, Marianne became more and more distraught. She couldn't cope with this news at all. I can only imagine. And she would lock herself in her apartment for days. She wouldn't eat, and if she left the apartment, she would have nervous breakdowns in public. Marianne was carrying so much guilt. She felt that everything was her fault. She felt like she wasn't there for Anna. And perhaps if she was, especially on that day, then she could have saved her. Then she could have saved her from this horrible creep that did this awful thing to her. And soon, this guilt would turn into a burning anger inside of Marianne. Possibly the most infuriating part about all of this was that Klaus Grabowski had a dark past filled with many offenses against little girls. He had received a probation sentence in 1973 for trying to end the life of a 6-year-old girl, and just a couple of years later, he took advantage of 2 9-year-old children. He was charged for this and was given a psych evaluation where they determined he was addicted to, I quote, abnormal sexual instinct and was considerably limited in his ability to prevent it, end quote. So instead of sending him to a prison, they sent him to a mental institution. And only 1 year into his sentence, authorities came to him and gave him 2 options. They said he could either stay in prison or the mental institution for the rest of his sentence, or he could choose to have a chemical castration. And I mean, a chemical castration is generally reversible, especially once you stop treatment and you can go to a doctor and reverse it. So of course, Klaus chose this option. He had the chemical castration and he was released immediately. Now he was roaming the streets again. I mean, he was a free man. How does this stuff happen? I mean, this man should have been behind bars. If he was behind bars or still in that mental institution, Anna would never had to go through this. And 2 years later, Klaus would go to a doctor to have the chemical castration reversed. And just so you know, if you don't know, a chemical castration is supposed to take those sick urges away. And apparently it does work. It doesn't always work, I've read. I'm not sure. But if this is what keeps him from doing that, then reversing it should never be an option. And he went through the courts to do this. He just said that he was having severe side effects from the medication, and the court just okayed it. And he was allowed to have it reversed. And there were no checkups, nothing done to see that this pig of a man was staying in line. I feel like if at any point these criminals want to reverse this procedure, there should be a stipulation saying that then they must return to prison or the mental institution. Because I'm sorry, why would we allow him to be free without that? If that's what's stopping him from doing this. I mean, it makes me so angry because it could have prevented all of this. And we know what he goes on to do. And I can't blame Marianne for having so much anger towards him. And I guess I can't really blame her for what she goes on to do next. Klaus's trial would only take place in March of 1981. And Marianne attended the trial every single day. She sat there and listened to testimonies about her and Anna. A lot of the testimonies were about the type of mother that she was to Anna. It was said that Marianne wasn't the best mother, that Anna was often without supervision, and that she visited neighbors and played in the streets, and that she was roaming the streets alone without supervision often. And I can only imagine how difficult this must have been for Marianne to listen to. I'm not excusing her behavior as a mother whatsoever. I just know that she was already carrying so much guilt with her, and to hear all of this from other people on top of that must have been extremely difficult. And she was visibly angry. She sat in that courtroom and she stared at Klaus. She even had emotional outbursts while Klaus was being questioned. When he didn't want to answer something, she would scream at him. And people judged her for this. I don't know how they did, because I'm sure all of us can imagine how we would feel if we were in her shoes. Now, the doctor who did the reversal for Klaus's chemical castration was also questioned and asked why he didn't do his due diligence when Klaus came in for the procedure. He basically just believed everything that Klaus said, and he should have done more research on this patient. But Anna's father actually went and tried to sue this doctor, even though he wasn't really much of a father to Anna. He probably carried some guilt too, who knows. But he tried to sue this doctor for negligence, but he lost the case. On the second day of the trial, the police had to go into detail of the crime scene and how they found Anna and how she was tied up. And this was extremely difficult for Marianne to listen to. But she also knew that the next day, Klaus would have the opportunity to share his version of events. And she already knew what his story was. He was telling everyone that her 7-year-old blackmailed him, and that's why he did it. And she wasn't willing for him to tell lies about her daughter or to even give him the opportunity to do that. She wasn't going to allow it. So on the 6th of May, 1981, Marianne walked into the courtroom before it was actually open to the public. And 5 minutes before court was in session, Klaus came in. And that's when Marianne entered and walked right up to the front of the courtroom until she was very close to where Klaus was sitting. She then pulled out her weapon and opened fire. She fired 8, and 7 actually hit Klaus. He fell on the ground and passed only minutes later. Marianne immediately dropped her weapon and waited for police to arrest her. She just kept on saying that she hoped that he was really gone, that he had passed on. And Christian, Anna's father, witnessed the whole thing, and all he could say was, wow, she really did it. With this, Marianne and Anna's story became so famous. It became one of the most famous cases of vigilante justice in Germany, possibly the world though, right? People named her the Revenge Mom, and the public actually sided with Marianne, and many parents came forward stating they understood why she did it. A support association was even formed for her, and within 1 week, 100,000 marks had been donated to fund her trial and legal fees, which is really incredible if you think about it. Marianne was released, but a few months later was arrested again as they claimed that she was a flight risk. She had to wait for more than a year for her trial to begin, and within that year, she tried to self-delete 5 times. Because she refused to cooperate with psychologists in prison, they placed her in a psych ward until her trial began. On the 2nd of November in 1982, Marianne Bachmeier was charged with manslaughter and she was sentenced to 6 years in prison. She spent a year and a half in the psych ward and then she was released. So she really didn't get a bad deal out of this if you think about it. But she never, ever showed any remorse. Later, Marianne moved to Nigeria and married a German professor. Unfortunately, though, this marriage didn't work out and she ended up moving to Sicily and worked there as a caregiver. Unfortunately, she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and moved back to Lübeck, and the last weeks of her life were actually filmed and made into a documentary. On the 17th of September 1996, Marianne passed away at the age of 46. She was laid to rest in Anna's grave. Wow, that is really sad, and what an interesting case. I had no idea that that was the story behind that short. I have also seen it many times before, but I never knew what Marianne's real story was, and I'm glad I do now. But I'm curious to know how you feel about it. Do you feel that she had a right to do that, or do you feel that regardless of what happened to her daughter, she had no right to do that? I look forward to hearing your opinions and your thoughts on this case. And as always, I want to thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe and like, and I will see you in the next one.